Now, Yahoshua has let us know over the years that there's no such thing as an ethnicity called Jews. That the Jews are the Nazis are the Jews because they were created by them, and they are, in fact, of Khazarian descent. Now, lest we forget our history, I want to bring out just a little bit of the history as to why this is the case. Because oftentimes we forget because there's so many other things going on, and this genocide has got to be stopped. Well, genetic scientific studies shows that the people known as the Jews of Israel, and indeed Jews all over the world, are in fact of Khazar, not Israelite, origins. And that information, they said, is backed by the earliest work of historians. These historians found that their scholarly books and reports were immediately attacked by the Zionists, who were desperate to maintain the fiction that the Jews could trace their heritage all the way back to Abraham. The Zionists knew the truth, that they are not a race, but a composite of many races. They had to keep up the myth that they were a homogeneous race kept together by religion and community interests for 5,000 years. Again, that is a myth. Only in this way could the Zionist Jews claim to be the seed of Abraham. Only as actual Israelites could they even claim possession to the land where they and their ancestors had never been, such as what we're talking about now, the Gaza Strip, Palestinian land. The Zionists knew also that their genocide and ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians was not justified unless they had claim for the land. They said, how else could they get the millions of evangelical Christians to support their horrible behavior? The Christians that are out there that think that you are protecting the Hebrew Israelites by protecting the false state of Israel is a lie. You have been duped. You have been lied to. You have been brainwashed. If the Zionists were suspected of being converts to Judaism and not actually the tribes mentioned in the Bible, then they were done. Their lie would be out. They would be seen for what they are, which are imposters. The Zionist Jews were able to pull off their racial hoax for decades because they controlled the printing press, so to speak. They controlled the printing press and the media from back in the day and even currently. Historians and anthropologists, by the way, some of them are actually what they call Jewish, wrote book after book. In 1899, a famous British historian, Houston Stewart Chamberlain, published a book called The Foundations of the 19th Century, which held that the Jews were not a race, but instead were bastards. Yitzhak Schipper, quoted extensively by Jacob Littman's The Economic Role of Jews in Medieval Poland, affirmed that the Khazars, that's Khazar if you want to look it up, were the Jews, or so-called Jews. In 1867, the great Jewish scholar Abraham Harkavi in The Jews and Languages of the Slavs spoke of the Jewish Yiddish language coming from the Khazars. It was, however, a prominent Jew named Arthur Ketzler, himself a Zionist, wrote in 1976, published a book which caused a huge sensation. It's called The 13th Tribe. Ketzler's accurate work was meant to be a refutation of Hitler and the Nazis, but it had incredible unintended consequences. In the book, he stated that the large majority of surviving Jews in the world is of Eastern European, thus perhaps mainly of Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race, and that they are genetically more closely related to the Hun, the Ulgur, that's Ulgur, and Magyar tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like the most cruel hoax which history has ever perpetrated. Kessler, who thought he was doing the Jews a good service, was of course attacked by other Zionists because he let the cat out of the bag. If they had come from the Khazars and were not of Israelite origin, or the original origin of mankind, then they had no ancestral claim to the land of what they are now calling Israel in the Middle East. They were not the seed of Abraham, but of King Bulan and the people of Khazaria. As Shmuel Sand, who's a history professor at the University of Tel Aviv, explained in his book, Invention of the Jewish People, without the Old Testament in its hand and the exile of Jewish people in its memory, Israel would have no justification for the annexing Arab Jerusalem and establishing settlements in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and even the Sinai Peninsula. Genetic science now enters the picture. Because of genetic science, historians, anthropologists have been able to find missing links and to unravel the mysteries of race and ethnology. In 2001, Dr. Ariella Oppenheimer of the Hebrew University, she was a biologist, and she published an extensive study of DNA and the origin of the Jews. Her research found that virtually all the Jews came from Khazar blood. Not only that, but Oppenheim discovered that the Palestinians, again, we're talking about the genocide going on in Gaza right now, the very people whom the Jews have been persecuting still to this day and ejected from what they considered their land since 1948, had more Israelite blood than did the Khazars. In sum, the vast majority of the people calling themselves Jews are not Jews, but the Palestinians were the real Israelites. Some of the Palestinians even had a chromosome which established that they were Cohens who worked at the ancient temple and the synagogues. Dr. Eran El-Haik, an associate at the McCusick Nathan's Institute of Genetic Medicine at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, wrote a book or a paper called The Missing Link of Jewish European Ancestry, contrasting the Rhineland, and of course that's in Germany, and the Khazarian hypothesis, and published by the Oxford Journal on behalf of the Society of Molecular Biology and Evolution. Dr. El-Haik reported that the Khazarian hypothesis suggests that Eastern European Jews descended from the Khazars. They settled in the Caucasus in the early centuries CE, Common Era, and converted to Judaism in the 8th century. Following the collapse of their empire, quite honestly, a lot of that came because of the Tsar of Russia and the nations surrounding Khazaria, because their children were disappearing in sex trafficking rings, etc. Same thing that's still going on to this day. Well, the Khazars fled to Eastern Europe. So the Eastern European so-called Jewry are actually the Khazars. So now, science through genetic proof has now found that many of the historians and anthropologists were actually correct. They were accurate. That the Jews of Israel are not of Abraham's descent, but instead came from King Bulan of Khazaria. So I always want to bring out some history when it's pertinent, family, especially when we're dealing with such critical things, such as massive loss of life, as what we're continuing to see ongoing in the Gaza Strip. On another note, family, we're continuing to go over the necessity for indexing, not only of individuals, but everything on this planet. That includes those corporations, because those corporations have been shut down, because the Vatican was shut down in 2000. And I'll get into that over the break. So with that, family, I'd like to go ahead and yield the call to Dr. Hindu I.L. Henderson, the ad hoc Chief Justice of the Universal World Court. He is Yahoshua Mashiach. Rise and shine, sir.
Rise and shine. How do you hear me?
Very clearly, sir.
Outstanding. This is the United Nations call, so let me say to the United Nations, welcome to the call. We do know that today is Friday, according to the United States of America's records. Right now, the United Nations is preparing themselves as they sleep well to rise up on a Saturday. So thereby, they're kind of like a number of hours ahead of us in the United States of America. Not only are they like a few hours ahead of us, if not many hours ahead of us. They seem to be light years ahead of us, based on what's going on around the world right now. It seems like the U.S. of A. is the only place that still has not yet caught up with everything that's going on. Right now, while the U.S. of A. is grappling and fighting with everyone based upon what is known as tariffs, trade deficits, trade disagreements, all the rest of the world is moving forward, working together in a manner whereby they will not starve each other out. But the U.S. of A. is placing itself in a position whereby it will soon be starved out in the next 6 months if it don't come up with some conclusion of how it's going to be able to operate with the rest of the world. As it has been said, you will either join the world or you will be left behind. And that's what's happening with the United States of America, if they might still deem themselves to be a nation, which that, too, has been a problem for all the other nations, because now every nation is still looking through everything they can find, archives, history, science. They're looking for some answer to how the U.S. of A. ever became a place whereby everyone has recognized it, everyone is familiar with it, based upon it claiming to be some wealthy, powerful place. And now no one can find it. No one has found any evidence whatsoever where this nation came from, or how it came to be, or how it gained its providence to be all over, well, worldwide known, and yet still not have any capabilities of doing anything without the outside world. Right now, the U.S. of A. is so indulged in doing nothing more than self-destruction until it hasn't even paid attention to all the nations that's around it, not even caring what it does or how it even turns out. Right now, the United States of America has a group of people that they call Federal Reserves. The Federal Reserves are those that they keep claiming to have also Federal Reserve gold, Federal Reserve banks, Federal Reserve centers whereby it is supposedly somehow reserving something federally for everyone to be able to benefit from, to include all around the world. The U.S. Central Bank will now find itself doing nothing more than threatening crypto, which, like any other banking service, instead of approaching the industrial with popular caution, they're going to find themselves left out. One reason is because of the word crypto. They have been cautioned so many times about using the word crypto. The Federal Reserve said Thursday evening it will no longer obligate member banks to provide advance notice of crypto or stable coin relating ventures. And they said they will instead monitor engagement with digital assets like it would any other bank. Now, this is the problem that the U.S. of A. is having right now. If it might have a serious problem based upon Federal Reserve, banking system, central banks, world banks, local banks. The problem they're having is kind of like a word difference. They keep saying crypto and trying to interchange those words of crypto and digital when those words are not interchangeable. You either got digital or you got crypto. Crypto, everyone knows that it is exactly what it means and what it says. Crypto is something that you cannot see. It's like a secret. A secret is out there in something that they classify as cyberspace. But cyberspace, we know, is just what it is. It's space. It's an area where it has nothing there. Nothing's there. Nothing tangible can be found in a crypto world. Nothing. Thereby, nothing being tangible being found, there is nothing that can be credited to anything or anyone or any place or anything, because it has no value. Which puts you back in the same situation which you're now working and have been working for the past would be 100 years to get yourself out of. And that's a system whereby derivatives, those things that are classified to be unknown, unseen, and uncredible, is still in existence. And that's what crypto, that's where it leads you. That's where it leaves you at. It leads to that and it leaves you at. Because there's no value. No value whatsoever in crypto. No matter who talks it, no matter where they come from. They have been told now, since at least the year of 2000, that crypto will have no value whatsoever on the planet. And all those people that went out and indulged and then found themselves involving themselves in something that they call crypto, based upon Bitcoin. Bitcoins have nothing that they can find on this planet or any other planet that can give it credit. Nothing. It was created out of thin air. It's still there in thin air, and it's still classified crypto. Cryptocurrency. Unable to see it, unable to touch it, unable to taste it, unable to hear it. Cryptocurrency does not exist, and it never will. Never will. So being that the Federal Reserve once found themselves trying to come up with crypto rules for all the banks, now they're beginning to say that they want to end that practice because they understand that it was nothing more than a choking point whereby they were trying to put the squeeze on all the banks to give credit to something that does not exist. There's a lot of men right now that are behind bars in the U.S. of A. based upon Bitcoins and cryptocurrency. Because still, even though they have in the past claimed to have billions and trillions of dollars that has come to a value of such would-be so-called systems that they call crypto, no one has yet been able to find not one copper penny, not one silver nickel, not one wooden Indian head nickel have they been able to find to give any credit to any type of system classified to be crypto or Bitcoin. Bitcoin, yes, is still hiding in the boundaries of what everybody deems to be finance because so many people have gotten tied into it. High-ranking officials have got tied into it. High celebrities have gotten tied into it. Those men that are sitting at the top of someone's would-be so-called rankings in sports have gotten tied into it. The world right now is so mixed up in Bitcoins and cryptocurrency until the digital currency that now is on the planet, no one seems to recognize it because they're too busy trying to interchange the word crypto with digital. And they're not the same. Digital just means that it comes by way of numbers on what will be classified as a computer program system. But it has a value. It has something giving it credit. That something that's giving it credit is still gold, silver, copper, and many of the other things you might classify to be precious metals. That is why right now the U.S. of A. is trying to put a squeeze on places like China based upon wanting them to somehow sell them or even loan them what would be classified as some of the precious metals of the planet. And even though Canada has claimed to have a would-be so-called precious metal, if we might say that, somewhere they have a resort center of precious metal where they have supposedly, I guess, collected precious metal from all around the world from, we would say, from its very time of beginning existence. But no one has been able to find this resort center up to this point, up to this time. No one has been able to find it. So thereby, talking about a reserve system of gold and silver, which America claims to have a reserve system of gold, no one has been able to find it. Not only that, America has never had a gold system. They have had a couple of gold rushes where they have rushed to see if they could find the gold, but only to get to those locations such as San Francisco, California. They never found that gold. And most of it was classified to be in what would be known to us as ghost mines. Ghost mines. They found some mines, but there was no gold there. And then as they began to claim it, that they wanted to say that some mysterious would-be ghost had taken the gold and removed it and placed it somewhere else where it had to be sought after, or should we say, sent out with those treasure hunters to find this lost treasure. Up to this point, no one has yet found it. And even though America has claimed for many years to have gold in Fort Knox, Kentucky, knowing that the gold that was in Fort Knox, Kentucky was not American owned. And even though it was placed there for a time whereby America used it as a credit to borrowing what they would classify to be notes of tender, they found that they were not able to keep successfully borrowing on that gold because that gold was removed from Fort Knox, Kentucky many, many years ago, many moons ago. And that gold has circulated throughout the world now, which has caused a lot of chaos, wars and wars and wars upon wars. It has created that chaos based upon the fact everyone's fighting for the same pot of gold. But that gold is owned, always has been owned, and always will be owned. And even though America has fought those and tried to destroy that bloodline of family off the planet, they have found themselves terminating their whole would-be world systems and world systems around them based upon the fact that it has been even placed in what would be known as in the Egyptian would-be studies of understanding that the gold must be, as one would say, cursed by God. Because each time America tries to get their hands on it, something seriously, mysteriously happens to it that causes it once again to fall, to fail, to become disruptive and destructive to the rest of the world, where all the world will find themselves again as they are now in World War III. As they have gone from World War I, World War II, and now they're fighting World War III based upon the fact of America claiming to have something that it don't. And all of the nations in the past has joined the United States of America in its would-be quest to create something that's not, which has also landed it in the same would-be curse of the gods of a war. And that's why all of them keep fighting each other. We do know that the Federal Reserve just Thursday evening, which would have been yesterday, said that it will no longer obligate members of banks to provide advance notice for crypto or any other type of so-called finance venue. The announcement comes weeks after parallel moves by the FDIC and the Office of the Controller of the Currency, two other key federal banking regulators. Those agencies similar classified the banks are legally permitted to engage in crypto-related activities and no longer required to receive explicit would-be so-called permission from regulators to do so. Back in January 23, we do understand that the FTX collapsed. During that time, we know that the agencies believe that issuing or holding or principal crypto access that are issued, stored, or transferred on an open would be public or even a decentralized network system, and it would be highly inconsistent with what was once practiced as safe and sound banking practices. Now, this day, they realize that that letter is now one of what we know it to be rescinded based upon the fact of where we're at right now. And since retaking office, President Donald Trump has made undoing this alleged anti-crypto banking discrimination, he would say, dubbed Operation Choke Point 2.0, a top priority. I don't even understand that if I would say for Mr. Trump that he has to realize that cryptocurrency, again, is an invisible currency. The Federal Reserve officially joined the FDIC and the OCC in making a formal shift away from such of those things based upon the Biden era, and they realized that there was a digital asset which they were still believing that they could somehow change it into a crypto circle, which all of the Democrats realized that there were four of them consistently part of the Federal Board currency, and there were three Republicans that were part of that same board. During that time, the chair, Jerome Powell, had shown himself in recent weeks to be willing to act independently of the president's wishes. But since that time, we must realize that the Federal Reserve, through Jerome Powell, is beginning to realize that this choke point 2.0 is not going anywhere, so thereby they're beginning now to remove those once upon a time said to be rules for banking based upon cryptocurrency. Again, cryptocurrency is not a currency at all. It's kind of, again, as I repeat, it's in cyberspace for all of you that are, I would say, some of the would be, I guess they call them galactics, based upon what would be known as the Star Enterprise. Stay with me. The Star Enterprise, everybody knows what the Star Enterprise was all about. The Star Enterprise is possibly still traveling out there in space. Spock and the rest of the crew, now being left by the commander, is probably still looking for a bank that they can stop by and pick up some cash for their next would-be voyage of the Star Trek Enterprise. That's what I'm talking about. Because, again, I say there are no banks that will even touch some so-called would-be cryptocurrency, knowing that it is not real, knowing that it has no existence, knowing that it is classified to be in cyberspace, and you're reaching for something that does not exist. It's not there. It's worse than a mirage, because running to a mirage, at least you'll get pretty much close to it, and sometimes you can fall into the mirage only to realize that it's dry sand rather than water. But with cryptocurrency, you cannot even do that because it's not even dry sand. There's nothing. Nothing exists. Now, I decided today, United Nations, to bring this information to all of the listeners based upon the fact it seems that this world in which we live in, a vast world, a world of 198 sovereign nations, a world whereby we have already claimed ourselves to be family of a global reset restoration network. A world whereby we have claimed that there's at least 10 plus billion people in existence. Yet and still, we find ourselves chasing after hoax after hoax. And I would say dreams after dreams that have now turned into nightmares upon nightmares. Because it does not exist. And right now, the U.S. of A. is in the business of doing nothing more than trying to discredit all of its people of color, and we have to say that. All of its people of color. And you need to understand how they're working to discredit those people of color. It has everything to do with your finance system. It's got everything to do with cryptocurrency. It's got everything to do with digital currency. It's got everything to do with money. And the United States of America right now is in the process of doing more of trying to discredit all the people of color who they believe have become so financially stable that they want to discredit them so they can somehow, we would say, confiscate all of the would-be wealth in which they have and place it back over into a would-be small corner whereby they could use it as something that they can fall back on or something that they use to move forward on to classify themselves as not being broke. Let me help them out. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Because the people that they're chasing and that they're now finding ways to lock them up behind bars so they can somehow confiscate their would-be so-called earnings or their would-be so-called credit, they don't have any. They don't have any credit. They don't have any currency because it all flows right back to the system and whereby it was created back in 1933. Yes, the would-be so-called United States federal system of what they deem now to be the Federal Reserve. How much did you have reserved in federal when you didn't have anything in reserve in federal to begin with? So that was nothing to reserve because you had nothing there to begin with. That was nothing ever placed there. And even though we would say Mr. Franklin himself, Roosevelt, we know for a fact that he himself was trying to create something there that did not exist. He went to the extent of doing nothing more than gathering up people's thimbles that they were using on their fingers to keep from pricking themselves when they were using needles to sew clothes as being seamsters. And he began to take up their thimbles that they had on their fingers because those thimbles were said to have been made of silver. So he would take up all of those thimbles and he would do nothing more than melt them down to make enough silver that he could claim that he had some type of reserve source of a would-be financial making system whereby he would be able to use his dollars that he classified to be note or tender note. But he was never able to collect enough would-be so-called thimbles. So he began to collect all the silver he could find from around the world. Precious silver, he would call it, precious metal. But they never received enough metal, and even though it was claimed to have had gold already in Fort Knox, no one never found that gold. So thereby he had a rush placed upon nothing more than to find silver. And every silver coin became something of value to Mr. Franklin Roosevelt. Became of value. But it never truly became any of value of the people. Why? Because the people were still using more copper than they were silver. And that copper came by way of pennies. Pennies were more, I would say, valuable during that time than a nickel. A nickel was silver. But the penny was copper, and it was worth more. And believe it or not, around the 1980s, the United States of America kind of set out to get all the pennies back, and they were doing nothing more than having a major would-be penny collection. But most people now, you walk right past pennies, you throw pennies down. Most of them, anyway, are no longer made of copper. They're made of some type of would-be, I would say, brass or whatever they make them of now. But they're not truly copper pennies anymore, the majority of them. And many of you that now still have pennies in jars somewhere, I can tell you that you have a lot of value there. You just don't know how valuable it is. I would tell you don't rush to go turn it in, because if you do and they find out that you got it, they're going to confiscate it. They're going to take it from you anyway. Some of you have a 1943 silver penny, silver, and that thing is worth a whole lot. I know where a number of them are at. Sure do. And I can tell you that now. The United States of America would love to get their hands on a 1943 silver penny. It's silver. And that was around the time when they were really, really working hard to make the silver work. They just couldn't get enough of it. Again, it started with one knowing himself to be such a would-be philanthropist, known as your president, again, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But he never was able to make any of that work, whereby, again, 1943 passed, 1953 passed, and yet still America was still in debt.